Hello everybody, the UFC Wildcat here, and I'm bringing you my second video reviewing the Celestial Tournament done by the FanZ developers. And we have 3 previews, one of which I actually gave to you when that was a sick video. Hopefully you guys go check that out for my initial thoughts of King Cold. After sitting around and thinking about it a bit more, I'm also going to discuss him. I'm also going to discuss the other 2 Legacy MPs that we got new levels for in Android 17 and Android 16. So let's get on into it. We're going to start off with my boy King Cold. So we're going to do another quick recap for him. He's an ally, King Cold off guard. It's pretty ridiculous as this ally, because in his bracket, his highest bracket, he's an E. And then he's got 3 brackets that are in the D bracket, and that is insane. So he's a really strong personality if you do happen to get stage locked. So, I mean, still get a lot of value out of him as an ally, especially attack-wise. But let's go into the power that he has. So this card is considered to be a name card for your effects. So again, you see a lot of synergy with Frieza, and there's a few other effects that we can get into. But moving forward, if your MP is Frieza or cooler, you may use this power regardless of your MP's power stages. So again, not only is this being able to be used with Frieza, which is one of the main reasons that we're seeing it, but it also has some interaction with cooler, which is very, very cool. So if your MP is Frieza, your opponent cannot use effects that lower your MP 1 or more levels. Very, very strong effect right there as well. So the actual attack on it is power, physical attack. It deals 1 life card, so an Icarus type attack. And then hit, rejuvenate a name card in your discard pile or banish zone. So this is actually a really cool power. So let's review it a bit. So what are some really cool interactions that I see with King Cold? So right off the bat, let's just get it out of the way. His interaction with Frieza is going to be one of the best. This is going to be one of the main reasons that we do see Frieza decks really take off. It's going to be the fact that if you can get King Cold out and you can keep him out, you're going to be able to sit on that level 2 and get some really, really strong effects. And basically, you're not going to get punished for using the level 1 right off the gate. It's a really, really strong ability, and I think it's one of the best in the game. So I'm really excited that we do have this King Cold now, because a lot of people were worried about Frieza. If you get de-leveled, you're just SOL. Nothing's going to go your way, and it's really, really hard to battle back from that. But now that we have King Cold, you slap him out. If you get that out, it's, you know, they have to have an answer for King Cold. So now it's something people have to have in their deck. And while we do have a lot of ally tech out there, you know, again, that's a lot to ask for, to hold on to your ally tech. It's going to slow you down as I'm progressing my game plan. So that's, again, something that people have to worry about, and I think it's really, really cool. The ability to also, if the opponent does have a hard time keeping him out, throwing a physical for 1, asking them to block this physical for 1 is going to be very, very hard for the opponent. It's similar to Icarus. Even though I get a rejuvenate a card in these Namekian Restored Gohan decks, when they're able to rejuve 1, they usually do it selectively, like after they've done a hybrid defense, and then they use Icarus. It's a physical for 1 life card, which is not a lot of damage, but if it hits, I'm going to have hybrid defense at the bottom, and I'm just going to throw that right to the top, and I've just recycled a block. That's one of the really strong effects of Icarus. So when you have that in a card like King Cold, in a deck where you've just banished 7 of your Frieza name cards, if you can get off a King Cold attack, and your opponent doesn't block it, because again, it's really, really hard to justify blocking that. You'll rejuvenate 1 of the banished cards, then you do Frieza, you rejuvenate another banished card. You've already got 2 in your deck, and if you're running the full allotment that you should be of 8 cards, you're back to 3 in your deck. 2 more combats, and you have your 7. So even if you do get lowered, you have the ability to bounce back up again, and that's really strong. If you're a deck that doesn't shuffle, which I don't see. The issue is, I do see Dragon Ball decks, you know, searching their deck a few times and do getting that shuffle, so the Frieza cards do get a bit mixed. But if you don't shuffle your deck in, like, as an example, a Dragon Ball deck, if you find a way not to shuffle your deck and you're just naturally drawing your Dragon Balls, all those Frieza name cards that, again, people say are really, really bad and you don't want them in your deck because they're going to make your hand bad, they're at the bottom. So it's going to take you a while to actually draw them. So your deck is still filtered, but you still have that kind of life support with those bad Frieza cards. That, again, is really, really strong. So I think King Cold, as a person, or as an ally, is going to really, really move these Frieza decks into a big threat. And I probably would run him in every Frieza deck. You know, there are decks that just run random allies. You don't have to have an ally searcher. There's a lot of Kami. Kami's one that comes to mind that's running a lot of decks, and people don't always run an ally searcher. Black Krillin being one of the big examples when he did run Kami, being one of the cards that I think was really just too strong, and if I naturally drew Kami and put him into play, I'm just getting so much value out of that. So I do see King Cold doing that. You don't have to run the overpowering attacks, though I probably would. I'd probably run King Cold and some more allies as him, especially Ginyu. If you have Ginyu and King Cold, and then you also throw in some of the other allies, like, I'd throw probably, if I was running a tag deck, if I would, I want to run Protective Frieza, but if I did go tag, I would run Dodoria as well. Ball capture, it's really hard not to run something like that, but I digress. Being able to run these allies and like an overpowering attack, getting him out, but even if you don't run overpowering attack, having King Cold out right off the gate, it's going to be really, really strong. So again, I think one of the best allies that have come out. Again, like I said, his AT is also ridiculous, so if you have him out for a while and your opponent doesn't have an answer, it's going to be really, really hard for your opponent to deal with that. So we haven't even talked about one of the other aspects. Him with Cooler is one of the most exciting for me, because I'll probably build a blue protective Cooler deck, similar to what I ran at Gen Con where I got top 16. The deck itself is very, very good, and having this ability to rejuvenate these name cards really makes me excited for cards like Cooler's Rebirth. I probably would run a singleton Cooler's Rebirth in my decks, just for the fact that I can use King Cold's power after I take some damage and, you know, banish Cooler's Rebirth, just to rejuvenate that Cooler's Rebirth back into my deck, because it can get so much value in it, just more rejuvenation that you can have. So being able to lock the opponent out and just fatiguing them is what Blue Cooler did, and having an ability to add a 4 life card back into your deck is just too strong. And even when you do draw it, the card's ridiculous, as it just puts 2 cards back from your banish zone. They're styled, obviously, but puts those 2 back. And then you also put it on top of your life deck to prepare for another attack. So that already is ridiculous. And I know people were upset about, oh, but I may have to rejuvenate my supernovas. Well, you can target your banish zone. So if there's nothing in there, you don't rejuvenate those novas that are in the discard pile for blowing up setups and stuff. But if you do have a nova in the discard pile, you also have the ability to recoup those Cooler supernovas, which are very power cards. So again, I don't see how you don't run Cooler, and when you run cards like Blue Clash to be able to get him out of the banish zone, you're not running tag just to have Cooler. It's just our King Cold. It's just another ability to run a really strong ally to add to the suite of Zarbon, Salza, and Captain Ginyu. So again, you don't need to have him out, but when he is out, it's just a really big power play. And then something else that a lot of people haven't talked about, but I think is also ridiculous. How are you not running King Cold in any ally deck, period? If I'm running a deck that runs name cards, like, just a random out there, if I'm running Captain Ginyu, I'm running King Cold. And the main reason is if I'm running a card like Captain Ginyu's Pain, for example, the card that is a setup and it mills them based on your allies in the banish zone, as a tag deck, you're going to have a few of those. So if you run Captain Ginyu's Pain, it's banished after use, you just use King Cold and you rejuve that card as you're rejuvenating the allies as well. That's a lot of potential mill. So Captain Ginyu may even have an ability to use King Cold very effectively and maybe be a mill ally deck. That's something that I definitely think should be looked at. And also, Android 17, I think Midia, who made the blue Tag Team 17 deck that utilizes these allies, is also going to be a disgusting deck with King Cold, because one thing that I noticed, whenever I would run out of Vans, I would be upset. Why not just use King Cold to rejuvenate a Van back in the deck and then 17 power for the Van back on the field and then use it again? That's a really, really strong play right there. That's exactly what I would be doing with it. So again, that's a really good card. I think King Cold is going to be one of the best allies that have come out in a long time. And I think it's going to be one of the best villain allies. And if you're not running it, you're doing something wrong, especially if you're running an ally villain deck. So that's my thoughts on King Cold as I branch out a little bit more some of my ideas that I've been having with the deck. Let's move on to the MP that came out on the blog. first before the final one that came out just this weekend. We have Android 16 Focused. This is a new level 1 for 16, and I'm very excited to see this. So we look at it, and unfortunately, one thing that I've noticed about these Androids, they are either weaker or right on par with what their old level 1s are. And while that's not bad, basically all you're getting is a power upgrade, and that's fine. But when we move on to the other one, I'll again get to why my complaints about that. But let's move on to Android 16 Focus. So he's very strong. He's got 4 brackets in the D bracket, which is very, very good. A lot of C, and then he's got a few of the lower B and A brackets in the bottom 3. So again, he's still a really strong personality that can do a lot of beefy damage. But let's go into it. He's got a PUR of 2, and he has the same ability that you can run your rogue cards, your alignment cards in your deck. So I can still run my hero only in my Android 16 villain deck. So. And this is what's really good. He's got a power. It's a physical attack. It raises or lowers a player's anger 2 levels. So again, this is great anger control, or it can help you push yourself up some levels. And I really do like that. You may rejuvenate a card that is an alignment restricted card in your discard pile. So that's really good to replenish your heroic and villainous energy spheres and your stare down confrontations. Those are going to be big cards that I'm going to talk about when I delve more into 16. And then we got a hit effect, which is really good. If you have changed levels as combat, search your discard pile for a card that is an alignment restricted card and place it in your hand. And the damage of this is 2 life cards. So I'll get into the hit effect. A lot of people were confused right out the gate, but this hit effect is pretty busted. So let's get into Android 16 Focus. So when I played 16, so I actually did play 16 a lot when Perfection had come out, and it was one of the decks that I forget who made it big. I think he actually went to Worlds, if I can remember his name. I'm going to have to put it on the video, and I may even tag him or something. Oh, this is so terrible. He won the Florida Regional. I think that's who I talked to. But he made 16 right off the gate. And when I saw his list, I decided to make a deck very, very similar to that. I thought his idea was really, really good, but I wanted to kind of expand upon it and see what I could do with Android 16. What it was a tag Android 16 deck that would get Android 20 out and just push this massive amount of unpreventable damage, and using cards like Android 16's Tranquility to force you into combat is just the most crippling thing in the world. And I don't think a lot of people understand that, because when 16 was getting played at sort of a fun level, this was before regional season, and I had been playing the deck, and I realized this deck was so ridiculous that before me and my team of Alec Reed and Eric Jennings and Ryan Littman began testing when regionals were about to come up, I was pretty confident before we went in there. I was like literally 70-30 of getting a plane ticket and flying out to Salem and playing Android 16 Tag Team, because I was that confident in the deck, because it literally had an ability to just roll over people when you got punished, especially these setup-intensive decks. And the reason you would do that is Android 16's Tranquility, if you had that in a VTP, it was basically game over if your opponent played had a hand below 3. If your opponent played like 2 setups or 2 non-combats and they entered their planning step, it was basically game over, especially if you could get up to level 2. Because your hand advantage was ridiculous, and most of the time you would have a sphere, you would have a stare down to either deal with their block or sphere their time, and it would just like put them on their heels. And that's what Android 16 can do. It can put your opponent in a position where they've got to be a little bit conservative with their hands and try and play a mind game around you using Android 16's Tranquility. So placing all of your setups is probably a terrible idea, especially when I have that on the board. And that's what 16 can do. And the big problem I had with it is the level 1 was absolutely terrible, because it was very punishing as you tried to set up the board, because you weren't trying to enter, you were trying to have your opponent get in a bad position and make them enter. So it would be milling you, it would also give them a life card buff, and it would make all their cards in their deck have endurance. So when you try to push damage, you weren't getting a lot through, and that was a big issue that I had with Android 16, was that Android 20 was massive, but if Android 20 left the field, you got hurt and you were really struggling. One of the big things that you did with that was being able to run dominance is to push yourself up and get like attack drill and some of the other big buffs and just punish them in a combat. But it was hard to set up. the big problem when I started to test it, and that's why I literally decided against going to Salem, is because it took a while to set up, and if your opponent had any momentum and got in on you, you were screwed, because he has a big problem with his stages in the decks that I was running. So the reason I really like this Android 16 is he has the ability to push himself up with a dominant, so you don't get punished by getting de-leveled, because his powers can also facilitate your anger a little bit. So if you run a little bit of anger in the deck and you get lowered, you can use his power to jump back up. So I think that's really, really good. One of my bigger problems has been stage, and that's one of the big things that I'll get into. But this power has an ability to just kind of facilitate you pushing yourself up and then just having a burst combat. So I ran it in tag. I actually built a deck and played DDA once with this, and I thought it was very good. It does have the same ability, and one of the big combos that it does is, looping Crushing Beam with Rocket Punch. Basically, you have a dead card or a card you don't care about that you can banish. You go grab Crushing Beam, you play Crushing Beam, you Rocket Punch again to go grab Crushing Beam, and you basically have, in that instance, a crap ton of damage just coming into their face, unpreventable, all banished. So that was a really strong ability. But of course, that's 6 stages that you've got to pay for, plus you've got to have a block, plus they got to have nothing. That's why you wanted to be able to force them to enter, so that they didn't have a lot of actions. They didn't have an ability to just answer. They just had to take the damage. So one of the bigger things that I'm looking at now with 16 is you've got to be a little bit aggressive. You've got to kind of put the pressure on your opponent and ask them to accept all of this damage, ask them to try and have an answers, and then just kind of start running out of stuff, and then you Tranquility them in. So I don't think tag is the best place for 16 at the moment. I think a tag 16 deck is really, really good, and I think it can do a lot of stuff. It has the ability to punish, but again, I think it's slow. So one of the decks I'm thinking about is red for Android 16. You have an ability to gain some anger, but then you also have a crazy ability to lower yourself down, use the 16 power to bounce back up. You don't even have to bounce back up, because if I read this correctly, if you've changed level this combat, so if you lower down into the 16 level and then use it, you still get the ability to go add a card to your hand. So again, one of the better styles in level hopping is red, so I think red is the one style that you want to do it. My problem is you're running a lot of non-style cards, so running it in Ruthless seems wrong. Android 13, one of the big things that people saw early was, oh my god, Ruthless and all the stage loss, it's ridiculous. But Android 13 was a deck that was really focused around the non-styled cards. And as 16, you run a lot of alignment cards. So, some things that you may do is you may cut back on a lot of those and just run the Confro, Sphere, and Stare Down package. And that's all your alignment cards. It's basically just using the stare downs, using the spheres to just cripple your opponent that way. That may be the way that you do run 16 in a Ruthless deck. It's something I've got to look into a little bit more, so maybe that's the deck you want to run. I know there was talks about Devious when I was on a podcast with the Dennis Bros and DDA. I think they're doing the Super Brew Bros or something. I don't remember the name exactly. They've been bouncing around names with that. But that podcast, I discussed it a little bit in terms of black may be an option for 16. But we'll see how that works. I got to look into that more. So I think 16 has potential. It's just a field that not a lot of people have jumped into. It's just these alignment cards are super strong when they did come out. I don't know how many more we're going to get with future sets. So it's really up in the air. But if we do get a lot of good stuff, then 16 could be ridiculous. So I think 16 is a cool deck. I would really, really like him to do well, and I'll probably use him as one of my first, if not Frieza, if not some of these other decks with King Cold. So 16, I'm a little bit over the place, because I did find success with him, but as I'm talking it through with you guys, the more ideas start to flow. So we'll see how that goes. And then we're going to finish off with the final MP reveal that we had of our Legacy MPs. It is Android 17 Entertained, and I'm fairly disappointed with a lot of stuff with Android 17. I think he's still a cool MP, and he actually has a lot of good utility, but he wasn't what I was expecting, and I'm actually disappointed with a lot of things. And I'm going to start off with his actual brackets. So when you look at it, for example, his highest level is 100,000, so he gets one level in D, when his old level 1 had 2. He had 125,000 and 100,000. So he had 2 D brackets, and that was something really, really cool about 17, is that at the time in Evolution, he was one of the strongest MPs in terms of power ratings. You go down the list, basically everything else is in C, but he ends in 2 D brackets, or 2 B brackets, which is fine. But again, one of my biggest problems is, he was a physical beatdown MP, and now he's kind of lost that. He doesn't have as strong of an ability, especially in a level like this that doesn't feel very close in terms of synergy with your opponent or with your rest of your MP stack. This may be a deck that you want to sit on one, and I don't know how great this level 1 is. So let's go into the actual power. So this is actually really cool. It's an instant power. And then use after your opponent uses a card effect to draw any number of cards. Discard a card at random from your opponent's hand. So when looking at this is another thing that I don't know if many people have talked about. I was kind of out of the loop when 17 came out. Didn't really see much of the discussion for it. But I know I had my ideas. So when you look at this, it's really, really cool. Like, this is going to punish a lot of decks that like to use draw abilities. So that right there is really, really big. It's going to maybe sometimes play some mind games. Your opponent's like, oh, I got good cards in my hand. I don't want to draw an extra card that A, may be bad, and B, may discard some of the best cards in my hand. So I don't think that'll happen. I think most people will be very greedy and just draw more cards, and they'll be like, all right, I discard a random card. Sometimes they may overlook that. But my big problem with that is if you look at it, it's an instant power. So unfortunately, this isn't like a pure counter to some of the decks that you'll see. You get to use this once a combat. So unfortunately, that's not going to be the best power to use. You're going to have to really be able to choose when the best opportunities to use this against your opponent are. Because if I'm playing against a draw coup deck and they're able to kind of combo off on me, and I use the infinite power when entering combat to discard a random card, that sucks. That may be a terrible instance to use it, and basically my power did nothing, because if he levels twice, he still draws 2 more cards, and I can't do anything about it. It's really disheartening, because I think 17's a cool personality, but that power right there, missed opportunities, especially with the ability, if you could use it, I force you to draw. Basically, if you draw via any card effect... Oh, they may have actually changed this now that I read it. Use after your opponent uses a card effect to draw any number of cards. So, I think this still works. This may be better than I thought, but it's still, I don't like the fact that you can only use it once. Because there are cards that force your opponent to draw. And when you do that, you can use this ability. Basically, my big problem with it was very pigeonholed into stop draw coup. Stop restored mastery. Stop... some of the other cards that draw, I'm lacking a bit. I know some people use some examples, but I know Restored's a big one that's used a lot, and as well as Draw Coup, a big topic of conversation. So I think 17's rather good, but that power, again, it feels like it left a lot to be desired. So let's move on to the actual other effect. He's got a physical attack that lowers your opponent's anger 1. It does 4 stages. But my problem, it's a hit effect. Search your life deck or discard pile for Android 17's van and place it into play. So again, 17's a personality that revolves around the van. So I really think that the fact that this is a hit effect is kind of a little lackluster. The Android 17 mill deck that I mentioned earlier, the fact that was really good is you could pull out the van instantaneously from your deck, and that was a really, really good effect. So while I think it's alright, I am a little upset that it is a hit effect. Oh, that might be the first cut I've ever had to do in a video. I've had a cold, so I'm sneezing, so I had to sneeze right there. So, again, I don't know if the attack's meaningful enough. I think trading the actual effect to go search your life deck for a hit effect that search life deck or discard pile may not be the best, especially when the van vanishes itself. You get better ramp with the van by the ability that I think at level 2 you can search your Banished Zone, and level 3 you obviously get to search your Banished Zone. I think even 4 you search your Banished Zone. So again, wanting to get the van out and have it out always is really, really good. So being able to search your discard pile is fine, but the fact that it's a hit effect, it's not going to let you early van and get some vans out. So again, the main draw of this is that instant power that 17 has, and I think it's cool. And the way I'm reading the new card, because I think the guy that we coin as Bojack Guy, who made the Bojack MPs, who's now doing the FanZ designs. So use after your opponent uses a card effect to draw any number of cards. He posted this image in the comment section. So this may be the new one. So it may work with the discard effects that you make him draw. So we'll see. There's a lot of effects that do draw cards. Saiyan's a big issue. That's one I was thinking of. There's a lot of Saiyan cards that draw cards. So you can punish them this way and try and combat these Saiyan personalities that like to use a bunch of draw mechanics in their deck. But I mean, if you look at somebody like Drawku, who has potentially like 5 in a combat to be able to draw, that's really, really hard. And I just wish it did more. I wish it was more punishing to draw. I wish like you could add something at the end of this, like use twice per combat, maybe, I don't know. It's a lot less than what I thought it would be. Still really cool, still has some viability, but the fact that it doesn't do enough for me is really hurting my ability. I think blue would be a really good style for him, especially because there's one card that comes to mind is Blue Head Charge. It does hit, your opponent draws a card. So you get to draw a card and hit, your opponent draws a card and then discards a card at random. So it's a really strong physical as well that does life cards. So I think that's really cool. And then black has a lot of cool interactions with these. Force your opponent draws a card, so this will help make those cards actually viable. So that may be cool as well to get some of these underground. You got to look back into set 3 and 4 for these cards that make you draw. I know one's Black Dazed. It's a rare that makes your opponent draw a card. So I think that could actually be fairly cool, but again, we don't know how viable that can be. We'll have to wait and see, especially in testing. It's something I'll look at. I haven't, like, this is one of the first times I've sat down and break down 17 with myself. I just know my initial reaction was kind of a letdown. It didn't do enough. So we'll see, but yeah, that'll be my recap for the part 2 of FanZ's reveals. I've been told that they're working on the MPs, so there will be more MPs next. The MPs are a little bit easier to try and design and develop, because especially the Legacy, because you just make one and you test that out, and you just have one. When you have a stack of 4, it does take a little bit longer to test, but we'll see how that goes, and hopefully we get some really cool designs from the developers, and hopefully that'll come out this weekend. We'll see what happens. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you like the video and you like these little recaps of what FanZ is doing, especially those who do not frequent retro, especially because the place is a little bit of a dull airspace right now, especially with the lack of FanZ, and it's just waiting on these developers to develop these cards, and it takes a little bit longer, obviously, especially with the effort that kind of got halted post everything else. But hopefully we'll get some more content. If you do like these videos where I do recap it, leave a like rating, subscribe, let me know what you guys think. I love doing these, and hopefully you guys do enjoy watching them. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is the UFC Wildcat, signing out.